Today is Friday, February 23rd, and this is Celtics Beat on CLNS Media, the leading online provider of audio-video coverage of the Boston Celtics. Episode 251, featuring radio play-by-play voice of the Celtics, Grande, is brought to you by eHarmony. Right now, my listeners can get a free month with eHarmony when they sign up for a 3-month subscription. Just use promo code CelticsBeat at checkout. Oh, it is so good to hear John Tesh again, isn't it? Thanks to Chuck Dietz, you've been wonderful, but I needed something different, at least for today. I needed a little bit of a change. And, speaking of change, let's address the elephant in our internet room, so to speak. Why is the show on a Friday after years and years of Sunday releases? You're probably wondering. I know certainly Nick Gelso and others at CLNS were wondering. Well, I'm going to tell you. One, I'm a pain in the ass. That's a big part of it. See, I wanted to give you one more show with one more great guest before the All-Star break. I've only got the one show under my belt. I wanted to keep talking Celtics. There's so much with this team, so I figured let's get another show in. But here's where we're really going to mix things up. We're going to skip the typical Sunday, so we're going to have this show, then we're going to have another release in the middle of next week after the C's have played 3 games against the Pistons, Knicks, and Grizzlies to kind of see where Boston stands with 20 games to play in the regular season. Hopefully not losers of 6 in a row or something like that. But stay tuned. That's why we're doing this. We want to be fresh. We want to be current. I don't want to give you a Sunday show that is going to have a couple of games that have just been played and then, it's coming at you either late Saturday night or first thing Sunday morning. People are tired. They're still kind of catching up. I want you to digest. I want you to be able to fully look ahead with this show. Again, get insights from another great guy and then coming out a full digest of the few games that we've got ahead of us. And part of this too, part of this whole extra shows thing, if you do like this show and you want more of it, and I hope that's the case, we need to hear it. So let me know on Twitter, at Adam M. Kaufman, or really even more important than that if you don't want to do that, leave comments on iTunes, leave ratings. If you like the show, 5-star ratings are great. They let people that pay for these things know that you're happy, so then they're happy, and we're happy, and I'm happy, and you're happy. It all makes sense, right? More good ratings, more good shows. Grande's going to join me in a few minutes, and we're going to get to a ton of great stuff from him. But let's get to some other housekeeping items. Just get these out of the way first. Marcus Smart is back. Now, Boston has gone 6-5 without its feisty, aggressive, defensive-minded guard since, of course, he foolishly, stupidly punched that picture frame in a Los Angeles hotel about a month ago. I don't even quite understand the angle at which he hit it so that he lacerated his right hand. I don't know what prompted him to do it. Even frustration is not a good enough excuse for me. He considers himself lucky that the injury wasn't season-ending. It could have been. I mean, we're talking about a significant chunk of glass that was in his hand that could have easily hit a tendon, and then this thing is all much worse. Sitting out for him was a lot of things. He used a lot of different devastating, it was frustrating, it was irritating, it was annoying, whatever. All of these things. Now, though, he is medically cleared to play. He's eager to return. We can look forward. And it sounds like, removing the fact that he was idiotic enough to do it, never should have happened in the first place, this incident, he's awfully damn lucky to be back.
They pulled a glass piece out the palm of my hand about that size. And they said there was 2 tendons that ran along the pinky area, the main tendons, and literally the glass was sitting right in between them. So they're like, you should go play the lotto or something because, you missed your tendons. And they don't understand. They don't really see how, So, I thank God for that every day. And it could have been worse. I'm glad it's not, and I'm glad for you.
Marcus went on to say that this thing could have been season-ending, could have required surgery if it did clip a tendon. And it's just, you're fortunate, you're happy that didn't happen, you're happy for him, you're happy for the organization, for the team, because you'd hate to see something so dumb, so brought upon yourself, affect the future of this team. Because I can't possibly harp enough on the importance of Marcus Smart, okay? The C's have lost 3 in a row, 4 of 5, 9 of 15. There have been injuries. Smart, Shane Larkin, Shemi Ojale, others. In the 15 games, Adam Himmelsbach of the Boston Globe noted in something he wrote recently, C's have a minus 1.5 net rating. They are getting outscored by 1.5 points per 100 possessions during the last 15 games, during which, again, they are 6-9. 20th in the NBA, that negative 1.5, behind teams like the Lakers, the Hornets, and the Magic. They're also 27th in field goal percentage, shooting about 43%, 20th in rebound percentage, an area that they were right at the top of the NBA for a good long while Clearly, that is not the case. Now, Marcus Smart, on an individual level, and I'm sort of contradicting myself here because defensive rating is very much a team statistic. It depends who is out on the floor. So it's not just the one guy. So it's gets confusing when you try and talk about one guy's impact in terms of defensive rating, which again is a team statistic. But if I'm not giving you enough of a popsicle headache, Smart has the best defensive rating in the NBA among players who play at least 30 minutes per game. 98.9 points allowed per 100 possessions. Okay? Again, best defensive rating in the entire NBA among players who play at least 30 minutes. Now, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, they're all in the top 10, but still, part of that, as well as for Marcus, plays into it being a team statistic. Point is, it's clear. Celtics are a better defensive team when Marcus Smart's on the floor. That's not rocket science. That is very clear. But the problems this team has had, and again, 40-19, that's great. 2 games out in the East behind Toronto, not an easy deficit to make up when you look at the different schedules, but it's not just Smart that has contributed to this team's struggles. They needed this break. They've been reeling. They're supposedly, and listening to them, re-energized now. They had over a week off, so let's hope that's the case. But what is the focus, right? That's what we're all wondering. What is the main focus? Coach Brad Stevens was actually on 98.5 The Sports Hub back on Wednesday. He addressed that. He was asked, Zolak and Bertrand, what is the main focus for the stretch run here?
I want to get back to being a team that finds a way and does so because it competes at the highest of levels on every possession. We haven't been a perfect team all year, but what we have done, especially the early part of the year, was we competed, we found a way. And I think that we have to put every piece of energy into that. We have to play better than we did heading into break. Everybody had the same all-star break. So to say that we were looking ahead to break or whatever the case may be, well, everybody else was in the same boat too. The bottom line is that's no excuse for poor performance. And we had a few of those heading into break, and we better play a lot better here over the next 23 games, because if we stay at the level we've been playing at, it's not good enough.
I spoke about it on Sunday's show with Chris Mannix from Yahoo Sports. C's are playing perhaps their worst basketball of the year. Miscommunication, no attitude or toughness, all of that, the lack of effort and chemistry and consistency that the Celtics are used to presenting out there on the floor, that we're used to seeing. And Smart's toughness, his energy, all of that, it's going to help, but it's not just him again. He doesn't alone fix multiple 20-point deficits or these routine slow starts. And I don't know how many times I've said it. This team, Celtics team, Brad Stevens teams, they're built on their defensive mentality and abilities, defensive schemes. Defense wins for Boston. I don't care about offense. Yes, of course, you need more points to win a game. I get the common sense element of it. But if we're to illustrate what I mean, 95-90 as opposed to 115-110, those are the kind of games that I like. Those are the kind of games that this team thrives with. When its defense is best, its offense is good enough, and they're able to take down some of these tougher teams like the Warriors. No, I don't mean in a 7-game series, certainly. They're not at that level yet, but in the regular season. Their best performances come in games where their defense is at its best. And defense has to be this team's calling card. They all talk about it. Danny Ainge talks about it. I don't know how many times you need to hear it. It's not that complicated. This team can't float. It can't turn it on in the playoffs. It is not the mentality of the coach. Nobody on this roster is even good enough to do that outside of Kyrie Irving when he was doing it in Cleveland and could do it in Cleveland because he had LeBron James. And, of course, taking nothing from Kyrie, he's a great player. But that mentality isn't going to work with this team. It's not on that level. This roster is not on that level. So what do we expect for the final 23 games? What are the lineup changes that are coming? What are the keys to the second half? How does this team attempt to catch Toronto? How does it get back on the same page to what we saw earlier in this year, in Mirage stage, when it was winning 16 games in a row? Let's talk to somebody who's smarter than me. Sean Grande is the radio play-by-play voice of the team across the Celtics radio network. Sean, how are you? How's the All-Star break treating you? Or do you actually get any breaks?
You know what? Well, it's funny. I did a little boxing, so not personally boxing, but, calling boxing.
That's a good thing.
Such as it is. I should clarify that.
Yeah, I didn't want to worry about you.
So that took him a few days, and then as Draymond Green was complaining, all of a sudden it's time to go back to work.
I want you to know I pay particularly close attention to your Twitter account because you send out a lot of great, interesting stats. I'm hoping, by the way, that most of these are computer generated and you're not actually tabulating all-time games and leads and deficits and everything else that you come up with after each and every game.
What's a calculator?
Well, yeah, but I mean, still, these things take you forever, I would think.
Well, it depends on, sometimes they become projects. It really depends on what it is. There's a lot of research and stuff that you can do, and everything is its own individual thing. But sometimes you can get a little bit down the rabbit hole. It's happened.
Sure. Well, the reason that I really enjoy looking at your Twitter outside of all the stats, I take notice of people who tend to follow a very small number of people. Numbers like that jump out to me for some reason, and you're obviously right there, seemingly with kind of a rigid, 145 to 150. And I don't know why I noticed that, and it seems creepy now that I'm even saying it out loud. But I bring it up not because you don't follow me, which, by the way, is just horribly misguided, but because I'm assuming that there's a reason that you, being the numbers guy that you are, you live at these specific numbers you do. And I'm curious.
It's an odd question, and I have a strange. The first thing is I have a bizarre OCD thing about having an even number, meaning ending in 0 or 5.
Okay,
it's a very weird thing that I have. I also have separate accounts. I have that main account that I use for work, and I use it primarily. I change a lot of the people based on who the Celtics are playing and what's coming up for me work-wise.
Interesting.
And I use it, and here's the real reason: I use that account during games. So I don't follow 500 people because I don't want my timeline. I'm constantly using it during the game.
Sure.
So it has to be related to. You're not going to follow your cousin who's tweeting about whatever because it's filling your timeline. And there's different ways to limit it and whatever, but that's actually the reason is that I use it so much or I have it so active during games that I don't follow a ton of people, for that reason because I want to know what's going on with the team that the Celtics are playing. You have a couple of Pistons people, like a Friday night, you're following a couple of Pistons people and your obvious NBA people and, the few people that you come into contact with work-wise, otherwise. But that's the reason I've always tried to keep it, very low. The whole idea was to keep it very low. I had this whole concept, by the way. Nobody ever picked up on this. To me, Facebook, I think the world would be a lot more interesting place if you were limited in the number of people you could be friends with, because then the whole thing would become like one big game of American Idol, which we love. Like if you had a new friend on Facebook, you had to kick somebody out.
Sure.
And that would be, oh my gosh, the drama that would create socially in your world. I can't believe nobody's ever, figured that out.
Which would mean if you did follow me on Twitter, and you see where I'm going with this, you'd have to boot somebody out.
Exactly right.
Which really you should be doing. Again,
but I follow you and other people on a different account.
So
it's interesting that you would use your time to basically complain that you're not, that I don't follow you on Twitter.
It's only because I have all the time in the world here. Recognizing that you don't, obviously. So this, I do want to know very quickly. This other account, obviously, it is not one that you publicize to people that you want people following you on.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. You have a personal life and a professional life, right?
See this? I like all. See the more you know about your local broadcaster,
the more you know. Yeah, and it's a strange world. That's sort of the way I started, and I never really evolved it. But I didn't. I remember doing it at one point where that was the idea was I didn't want and you can tweet deck and do all this complicated stuff that I'm not gonna get involved in. But the idea was to not because when you first get on there, you're like, oh my gosh, look at all these people I love. Let me follow Pink and let me follow, whatever. And then you realize, okay, this is not a good use of. This is a professional thing for me, not a personal thing. Because there's a lot of people that I know them and you know them that treat it like Facebook or other social media,
that's
whereas
for sure.
A lot of person, and that's great. But I'm not interested in seeing pictures of your kids while I'm calling the game and need to know what Anthony Davis is doing in New Orleans. You know what I mean? So that's the basic premise. I think everyone has their own divisions of social media and what's work and what's real, and there's actually an answer to that.
No, I get it. I follow 300 people and change, and I can tell you it is way too many. I need to cut it down. And I appreciate too that you're a smart guy because you can tell me that you follow me from this other mysterious account, and I'd have no way of knowing. Now
I know you. Here's what you're going to do now. Like you're going to be obsessed and go through people that follow you and try to figure out what,
I have a lot of time in my hands. I don't have that much time in my hands, but I don't want to use up all your time.
If I can stay up all night and figure out what the record is against the West this year, and when the last time the Celtics were down by 14 and came, whatever their record is. I'm tired of using that graphic. I'll tell you that. Hopefully we won't have to use hey, they're down by 18 again, so their record is really good when they're down by 18.
Yeah, that's one that hopefully you'll have the opportunity to not trot out anymore. Yeah. Before we get to the C's in the second half, though, and quote-unquote second half, because really it's the final quarter, what do you think of the new All-Star format and the fact that we actually had a competitive game this year?
I like trying new things. I don't know. To me, it really felt more like the old-school All-Star game in that it was the All-Star exhibition for 3 quarters, and then the fourth quarter everybody played defense, and it was like a real game, which is something that had not happened the last few years, in which all 4 quarters had gone insane. And Brad Stevens is the greatest defensive mind of our generation. He coached a team that gave up 200 points or whatever, which I will never let him forget for as long as everybody shall live. But I thought I like trying things is good. Exploring new ideas is good. A very popular one now is the idea of seeding 1 through 16 and getting rid of the East and West. I'm not crazy about that.
I don't like it at all.
I didn't like interleague play in baseball because I grew up a certain way, and the first 20 years of my life or whatever were the American League is the American League and the National League is the National League. But you know what? The fans liked it. And I'm old enough to remember when I was very young, the NHL did it once. I know this because I remember as a kid the Rangers playing the LA Kings in the first round of the playoffs. I know they did a 1 through 16, and that was obviously with commercial travel and whatever, and I think even shorter series. So I think exploring new ideas is always, with all apologies to Laura Ingraham, I think everyone can have a good idea, and we should explore them, all of them, whenever possible, and discuss them. I certainly I don't think there's any East-West allegiance when it comes to the NBA and the All-Star game. So I think that was certainly an interesting way to do it. People just want to see those guys play.
Yeah, that I absolutely agree with, and you don't need to apologize to her either. But let's talk about Kyrie Irving, who I'm sure would not issue her any sort of apology either. It's certainly a broad thinker, but he has had a great year. Some would even put him in the MVP conversation. Now, I'll admit, and maybe we've talked about this before, I was very skeptical about that trade last summer, having nothing to do with his clear abilities. There were a variety of factors. Now, among them, I wondered if he could really be the leader that he said he would be after some of the drama that we heard about in Cleveland. Now, you are close to the team, a hell of a lot closer than I am. What have you observed about him, his transition, and all this leadership?
That there are the same thing I always observe with Paul Pierce. There are different ways to be a leader. What's that Muhammad Ali line that they used in the movie? Like, I'm not going to be the champion the way you want me to be. I'm going to be the champion the way I want to be. And how is Brad Stevens a great leader of men when he doesn't necessarily possess the qualities that we used to think of that way? How does Kyrie Irving lead? He leads by example. He leads by encouraging younger players. And I think there's leadership. We saw Antoine Walker screaming at Paul Pierce on the bench in Game 3 in 2002. That's what we think of, I think, when we think of leadership. And Herb Brooks' speech and that thing. And I think there's just different ways that people can be inspired, and younger players being pulled aside by older players, stuff that we don't see. Brad Stevens showing so much respect for the players and putting them in position to be successful. There are different leadership comes in many different forms. So I was skeptical because the thing is, Kyrie was a really young player in Cleveland, and you gain a reputation. What was Paul Pierce's reputation around the league in 2004, let's say, 2005? Was Paul Pierce considered a great leader? Was Paul Pierce, it's just the contrary. He probably had more off-the-court stuff or incidents or whatever than, the acting out in the 2005 playoffs and the bad World Championship with George Karl in 2004. There was a lot of stuff, but you continue to grow as well. And I think I would pose it this way without going too far down this rabbit hole. How much of a leader can you be on a LeBron James team?
Yeah, it's fair. Absolutely. So, you're the clear second guy at best.
Yeah, we didn't like LeBron. LeBron is going to be the alpha of all alphas. And by the way, that's not wrong. I think when Kyrie wanted to split and do his own thing, I think all of us have the natural tendency to say, what, are you crazy? How can you not want to play with LeBron? But first of all, Kyrie's brain works differently than most people's brains. And this is some of the stuff we're talking about, that he wanted to be a leader. He wanted to be his own man. He wanted all these different elements played into it. And he knew, as great as LeBron was, this wasn't personal. This was about, what he wanted to accomplish. That he wanted to be the leader of a team, whatever, and that was not going to happen with LeBron. I was one of those people not necessarily skeptical about Kyrie, but my feeling was, man, you're going to tell your grandkids that you chose not to play with the greatest player of all time, who, been to finals 3 years in a row since you got there. And so I had the same sort of skepticism, like, or just sort of like, that's what an odd choice. And then, you see it up close and you realize that he just is a different kind of cat.
Well, and just the general thought of, look, if you want a team to be your team, you want to be the man, well, wait a year when LeBron theoretically leaves, if that were to happen. Or your contract's up in 2 years. Go leave at that point. Take the continued annual rite of passage to go to the finals each and every year, like you said, while you're still, you've barely even hit your prime at 27. More with Sean coming up in just a second. First, though, I want to tell you, today's show is powered in part by eHarmony. If you're trying online dating, chances are you've run into lazy text messages, dead-end conversations, random matches that just don't turn into dates. You can't get to know someone by just looking at their picture, and that's why you need the power of eHarmony. Now, eHarmony is unlike any other dating site. They take steps that other dating sites don't in order to find you a more compatible match. eHarmony uses years and years of science, data, and psychological research to send you the right matches. They've helped over 1 million people find their perfect match, and you could be the next. Right now, my listeners can get a free month with eHarmony when they sign up for a 3-month subscription. Use the promo code CelticsBeat at checkout. Easy to remember, CelticsBeat. In fact, CLNS's own Jimmy Toscano used it to test it out, found success in only a week or two. It's that easy. So stop waiting, start your journey to a satisfying, meaningful relationship. It can be fun to play around with online dating apps, but when you're ready to fall in love with someone and have a meaningful relationship, one app that is built to bring you real love, eHarmony. Come see how eHarmony can change your life. Go to eHarmony.com and get started. Enter promo code CelticsBeat at checkout. So, Sean, getting back to the C's, on that leadership, how would you say his leadership, the style that you have witnessed, and just the way that he conducts himself, it's such a polar opposite in a lot of different ways to what we had here the last couple of years with Isaiah Thomas, who, of course, a leader as well in his own right. How stylistically, completely off the court, have these guys differed?
Let me count the ways. I think they're very different people. I think this is a tough time to gauge Isaiah. It's really because I don't think there's any precedent for a player being fifth in the MVP voting 1 year. And then arguably, statistically, you could make a case Isaiah's been one of, if not the worst player in the NBA this year. Mm-hmm. That tells you a lot about environment, tells you a lot about situation, tells you a lot about roster composition around a certain player, tells you about a coaching situation. There's a lot of different elements of the things that have gone into Isaiah's bad year, and it's going to be interesting to see where he starts over. I don't think he'll be a Laker next year, so it could be another new team for him, when he starts. But I think Kyrie's probably more conscious of leadership things. I think Isaiah, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but Isaiah was at a point in his career where he really was about Isaiah. He really felt he had been, disrespected and not looked at as somebody who could perform on the court the way he did. And I think he was singularly focused on that. And it's not that he didn't want to win. Of course he did. I just think he was just really driven to prove I can accomplish this as an individual. And he did, by the way. It was one of the most amazing. I've seen a lot of amazing things. That was at top of the list of, you want to talk about one player's one season that I've gotten to call that I'm going to be remembering, when it's all over. Isaiah's year last year is going to be at the top of a very short list. But, leadership-wise, that's not the first thing I think of when I think of Isaiah.
As for this current team, Celtics have been in the funk, 3 straight losses, 9 of 15 since the London trip, heading into that long layoff, over a week off. Did the break come at the right time, or does the festering and having to sit on it make it worse?
No, it came at the wrong time. It came too late.
Yeah.
They were stumbling. I think they needed it. It was clearly a team. Sometimes you're playing well. If you're the Cavs, man, you didn't want that break. Everything was really starting to roll, but everyone finds a way to make it work. But yeah, the Celtics were just not themselves, and I think we spent a lot of time. We were talking about Kyrie. Obviously, Mark is going to get a ton of attention as he did yesterday and coming back, and that's a big part of the story. But as spectacular as Kyrie has been on some nights, he's had 35-point nights and the Celtics have won. He's had 35-point nights and the Celtics have lost. You want to look at the bellwether for this team. It's been Al Horford. To a lesser degree, Marcus Smart, but it's really been Al. And Al has just looked like a guy who needed a break. And here's what we've seen this year. When Al Horford is good, he is elite in the NBA. I could make a case for the first 20, 25 games of the year that he was the MVP of this team.
Completely agree.
Not Kyrie.
Completely agree.
Right. And so add to that, when Al has been good, the Celtics have been really tough to beat. When Al has been ordinary on back-to-backs and there's been a lot of games or whatever, when Al's ordinary, the Celtics are ordinary. And that's what we've seen more of that in this second third of the year. There was one of the homestands early in the year, and you can look up to date. The Celtics had been playing that long run of games. They didn't have a true day off. They were playing literally every other day, building up that massive amount of games up to New Year's before the London trip. And he'd one of those DNP rest nights where he didn't. I think the Celtics had a Monday and Friday home game, and then Al didn't play on Wednesday, just a rest night. And he came back on Friday, and it looked like a pitcher in the playoffs pitching on 4 days rest instead of 3. He was just a different guy. He was back. So, the Celtics schedule is not even that. It's not that ferocious now. Coming back, there are some few days off sprinkled in. They've got a really spread out road trip, some tough games, but the schedule is pretty spread out. I think there's no home-road disparity. They've been better on the road than at home, so the fact the season ends with a whole bunch of road games I don't think is a big concern. I think the biggest concern for me as a Celtic fan, if I'm worried about the big picture, is that to me it looks difficult right now to avoid Cleveland in the second round.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be hard to catch Toronto. Something is good. The Raptors are, every discussion like we just had, every discussion nationally all year has been about the Cavs, how bad they are, and how good the Celtics have been, and now that has flipped. Meanwhile, every night, Toronto just goes out and beat the living heck out of somebody else, and it's been a 6-game turnaround since London. They've gone from 4 down to up by 2, and they are rolling, and they are for real, and I get the skepticism because of what's happened in the playoffs, but them being tough to catch for the number 1 seed is big this year because you clearly have 3 elite teams in the East, and 2 of them are going to have to play in the second round. So that, to me, is the danger that the Celtics could have this great year, and if they can't get past Cleveland in the second round, it'll be looked at as a big step back when, in the big picture. I think when we're all said and done, I know I'm jumping ahead to May, I think when we wrap up in May, we're going to be talking an awful lot about October 17th and how the Gordon Hayward injury went away because they played so well for so long. But at the end of the day, that might be the defining, it's still going to end up being the defining moment of what they're able to accomplish in the big picture.
A lot there, obviously, that I want to touch on. Let's, go right back to the Cavs and Raptors for a second because, as you said, if they're unable, the C's, to catch Toronto, they're second. And then, theoretically, Cavs are third. And then they're squaring off in the second round. Even if the C's were to get past Cleveland, then you got to deal with the Raptors in the next round. So with all the energy that would have to be exerted to even beat Cleveland in a 7-game series, you're just talking about a roller coaster ride of physical and mental emotion. Chris Mannix on our last show, I asked him, who is the favorite in the East as you see it right now? And not to, come out as the 1 seed, but to actually come out of the East to be playing in June to inevitably face the Warriors. He thinks it is the Cavs after all the moves they made at the deadline. Are you on the same page with that, or are you taking Toronto really seriously, or are you thinking the C's can do it?
I think that we're talking about it's almost ridiculous to pick the Cavs right now because you're basing it on 2 games.
Right.
Now, everybody's overreacting on the Cavs as they should. That's all the sample we have. Remember, we just have a lot of time to talk about it. In this 2 weeks now it's been where the Cavs are undefeated, right, since the trade.
Mm-hmm.
So in that time, the Celtics early in the year probably won 9 games in a row in that same time period. We haven't had anything else to talk about, but oh my gosh, did the Cavs look great since the trade. So let's see what 10 games looks like. Let's see what 20 games looks like with that team. But, when the trades happened, remember that day? Everyone was like, well, I mean, if anybody else had those players, they wouldn't be making a big deal. It was about getting rid of we all get sick during the winter, right? It's a long winter. The weather gets us. We all get sick. Remember the first day, maybe people aren't there yet. The first day when you're like healthy again, first day in weeks where you haven't been sick and like you feel good. That's what the Cavs are like now. The sickness is gone. The things that were steering them into the ground are gone. So I don't know if this team is really if they're better than Toronto or if they're even better than the Celtics. We know that the Celtics can play at an extraordinarily high level. They haven't lately. Now we know what the Cavs are capable of doing with this team. Doesn't mean they're going to do it for 20 or 30 or 40 games. And as I say, every year it never happens. But one of these years, because it happens to everybody else, LeBron's going to slip on a banana peel at some point. It's going to happen one year, right, where LeBron's going to get hurt or something's going to, happen to Kevin Garnett in 2009. It happened to, Bynum in 2008. Players get hurt. It just never seems to happen to LeBron. And one thing can happen. DeRozan could get hurt. Kyrie could get hurt. Something dramatic that we can't. Opening night, we said, this is what we think is going to happen in the NBA this year, but you never really know what's going to happen. And if you listen to my call, that was exactly my call when Gordon got hurt, because you've been hearing it all day. Something will happen that we can't predict, and everything will change. And it happened to the Celtics 5 minutes into the season. But there's always something that's going to happen. Maybe John Wall comes back, and all of a sudden Washington becomes that team everyone thought they could be the last couple of years. Remember, they've played better against the best teams. And maybe Washington gets crazy hot and beats Toronto in the second round, and everything's up for grabs. But I think that we're overreacting to the Cavs. Not that they're not going to be really dangerous, and they've got LeBron, and I'll believe that the Cavs lose in the playoffs in the East when it's taken from his cold, dead hand, which it hasn't been since 2010. So I'll believe it when I see it. So I've always been on the Cavs that way. I didn't want to give up on it even when it was going so badly, because LeBron is still LeBron. But I think we're overreacting to the Cavs only because it's been 2 weeks with nothing else to talk about. And if you pick a 2-week span a few weeks ago, you'd say no way anyone's beaten Toronto. And if you picked a 2-week span in December or November, you'd say no way anyone's beaten the Celtics. So it's only 23, 24 games left. That's still a lot of time.
Are we going to see Gordon Hayward again this year?
No, I don't think so. I've never thought so. And the only thing that's worth discussing, and the only thing that has been, is could Gordon Hayward be more valuable in the playoffs than the 12th or 13th man on your roster? Because I've constantly gone back to Paul George. Paul George did come back. His injury happened 3 months earlier, and he came back and played in meaningless games with the Pacers out of the playoffs, 15 minutes a game, every other game, or whatever. It's just completely unfair to ask Gordon Hayward to come back and start basically trying things out again, starting from scratch in the middle of a second-round series against the Cavs. It's not a video game. You're not getting – when Gordon Hayward first steps back on the floor, he's not Gordon Hayward yet. So that's going to take some time. So I've never believed that it's physically possible. I've just never been a fan of – I don't think you should expect it. I don't think you should have high expectations of it if it happens, and I'm not sure it's a great idea. So that's my answer to that wet blanket as it is.
Brad Stevens said that there will definitely be changes to the rotation these upcoming games. We know Marcus Smart is coming back, but
yeah, that's the biggest one.
What do you expect? I mean, is it as simple as, okay, well, Marcus may start some games and you have smaller lineups, or we're going to start Marcus Morris more frequently? I just don't see, looking at the composition of this roster, how many different things you can really do differently.
No, they have to play better. I think you got to figure out the big situation, figure out where Greg Monroe fits. When the reality is, Greg Monroe, you want to get him work. You want to play him a lot. And he had a good game in Washington, or whatever. He's had moments. But Greg Monroe right now, in the context of this team, is a left-handed hitting first baseman who plays the day game after a night. He's got to be a platoon player, where there are days that he's going to play 25 minutes and other ones that he's only going to play 5 or 6, depending on the matchup. It's made it pretty crowded because – listen, you've got, I'm sure you know, statistically, you've got the Baines conundrum too, which is the more Baines plays, the better the Celtics play. Mm-hmm. And they've been better defensively. That doesn't always work. It's like, play him 30 minutes a game. He'll drop, he'll suck the oxygen out of the building if you try to play him 30 minutes a game. That doesn't work. But there certainly is something to the fact he's been the number one defensive player in the NBA all year. I think that's an issue. You look at, when you're taking changes and who's playing minutes, what's the difference between 22-4 and 18-15, which is how you can divide the two Celtics seasons so far, if you want, like from early December on. Well, Jason Tatum was the rookie of the year, wasn't he? for the first 25, 26 games, and he has not been. And you can talk about rookie wall, whatever it is. Teams, no one's talking about teams putting him on the scouting report now, and they can change it that way. So that's an issue too.
Well, people not to cut you off. People aren't talking as much about the finger injury that you can look at the shooting splits. People aren't talking about as much the fact that he had a kid in the middle of the year. I mean, to me, the rookie wall thing is just such a lazy narrative, and we're hearing it from everyone. I don't know what your view is on that in terms specifically to Jason Tatum.
Well, here's my Jason Tatum. The thing that I would say about Jason Tatum, the one word I'd use, 19. That's what I would use when talking about the inconsistency of his play. He's 19 years old, and because he played like a 26-year-old for so long, we just assumed he would always do that. That he's just going to walk into the league and be 26, and when he's got to have a chance to be 19. So there's a lot of things that should go better. Jalen's going to shoot better. I'm really interested to see how they hit the ground here.
Let's talk about that. I won't ask you to, what's the cure for the final 23 games? There's so many different factors to that. But smaller scale, this road trip to Detroit, New York, what are the keys?
What you want to see is I'm trying to think of the word that Jimmy O'Brien used to use. It wasn't a discipline to play defense. The willingness to defend every minute you're on the floor for the high level, which is why. And again, I don't want to bring Isaiah back into this whole thing, but how did a team lose Avery Bradley and Jay Crowder and go from a middle-of-the-pack defensive team to historically one of the best defensive teams in the last 10, 15 years? And a lot of it has to do with Isaiah and the way they were playing. But, a lot of that is effort, and it's the ability to give that effort. And I don't know how much of it's been there. I don't know how much of this is fatigue. I don't know how much, maybe they really are 18 and 15. I don't think so. But I think that's what we're going to find out. Detroit, to me, is an interesting team. Like, somebody, in theory, kept waiting for Detroit to come up and take that last spot that, no way Philadelphia's going to hold on. Sixers are in good shape here. They've got one of the easiest schedules remaining. They've gotten through a lot of the tough back-to-backs without Embiid. So they're going to be tough. The Knicks, I think, are one of those teams, and the Celtics will see a lot of them, coming up here in New York, Sacramento, teams that don't have a ton of motivation. Atlanta late in the year. There's another game in Orlando. We're going to have a lot of games coming up at the end against teams that don't really have motivation to win. So, and New York is certainly going to be one of those at this point. And the Celtics have always played well in New York. So, I think a lot of eyes are going to be focused on Marcus Smart, and rightly so, because that's a big part of the difference. Not just the injury, but he's another one of those guys that was not playing as well in the second third of the year as he did in the first. And when you think back to those games, close your eyes unless you're driving, think back to a lot of those early games in the win streak or whatever, Marcus was doing Marcus Smart things in the fourth quarter of all those games.
You talk to a lot of people in the organization, and I won't ask you to divulge private conversations, certainly, but Marcus's year, from the struggles leading into the injury and then obviously the self-inflicted injury of the severity that it was, could have cost him the remainder of the season. He spoke about that. Has that impacted Boston's desire to bring him back next year and beyond?
I don't know. I think Danny is as good as anybody in big picture thinking and not being affected by the micro. I mean, this is going to be a stamp on his season, and there's no doubt about it. It's an issue that it really hurt the Celtics. It was a Marcus Smart related issue and literally a self-inflicted wound. But I think the thing is we're talking now, Marcus Smart's season is going to be defined by what happens now. I don't think it'll be defined by what happened in LA. He's about to write his own future. And I think the Celtics love Marcus Smart, and Marcus Smart loves Boston and all those things. The issue is going to be about at the end of the day, it's going to be what it always is. It's going to be about roster, salary, roster replication, with the emergence of Terry Rozier, and what makes sense salary-wise for, the Celtics want Marcus Smart to be here. There's no question about that. But, can you do it with the salary restrictions being what they are? That's going to be what decides it, not what happened in a hotel room in February, and maybe not even what happens on the floor the next 2 months.
Hey, that secret Twitter account, I don't know how many people you follow, but does it still end in a 0 or a 5?
You know what? You're going to have to do a lot more research than that to find it. You're on your own.
I wasn't even going to look into that. I just wanted to know from your idiosyncrasies. Sean Grande,
you think you know them so well? We'll figure it out.
Well, look, Sean may be following you on Twitter for all you know. Thank you. See, that's the grind. Is it under Sean? It could be anything. Play-by-play voice of the team across the Celtics radio network. Sean, thanks a lot.
You got it, man.
Terrific stuff from Sean, as usual. Of course, you can, I'm not going to go to, despite what he thinks, I'm not going to go to work trying to figure out what his secret Twitter account is. But if you guys want to and you want to spend that time and research it, by all means, tweet at me if you find it, because I'd love to know and find out if it does follow me. And I'm sure he thinks I'm just fishing for followers. That's not the case, although it definitely sounded that way. But speaking of followers, you guys are great. You can get me on Twitter at Adam M. Kaufman, where I'm always happy to interact with you there. I know we're not able to take calls on this show, and so I do take your tweets, at least a couple anyway, for each of these shows, depending on how long we're running. Only have time for a couple right now. First one comes from Steve, at We Play for Titles. How will Marcus Smart perform in his first game back? Tell you what, I expect him to be out there and playing considerable minutes, meaning, Steve, at least 25. You know, I don't think he's going to be worked in there. I don't think it's going to be a play 15 minutes and see what he's got type of situation. I also don't think he's going to go out and play necessarily his normal 30 to 32. I think it's going to be like 25, 26 minutes, depending on how the game flow is going. Obviously, if the Celtics can open up a big lead, maybe he's not needed as much. Or if it's a really tight game, maybe he plays a little bit more because we know how important he is late in games. But in terms of how he'll play, I expect the attitude. I expect an even bigger chip on his shoulder. I expect the great defensive energy and mentality and bulldog approach, and he's going to take a handful of threes as he does. And he's probably going to take his usual 8 to 12 shots, and he'll probably score 10 or 12 points, and that's just Marcus. That's a long-winded way of saying I think Marcus is going to be Marcus, and I think that's how he's going to play in his first game back. I think the layoff will have helped everyone. He'll have practiced, and I think he's going to be fine. From S at I'm Tell, I guess. Is there a way to get Smart, staying on Smart, to be more judicious in his shot selection without handicapping the rest of his game? It's a great question. I think a lot of people are wondering that. Thing is, it doesn't really matter what I think or what you think or what others in the media or fans think about, hey, Marcus takes way too many three-pointers and this sucks and why is he even taking 10 shots a game and taking shots potentially away from guys like Tatum and Brown, because the way this offense operates, short of, Kyrie Irving, who's going to take 18, 19, 20 shots a game, Brad Stevens wants Marcus Smart to shoot when he has the ball. He's talked about it. If Marcus is there and he has an open look, he wants him to take it. Now, I don't want him to take these crazy shots early in the shot clock or these threes from a few feet behind the line or these heat check threes that he will do, the late quarter heaves, whatever. I mean, they are what they are when the clock is running, and Terry Rozier is starting to get in the spirit of some of his buzzer beaters. But I just don't think there is a way to necessarily rein that in unless that is the message, and that is not the message. The message is, you got an opportunity to shoot, you got a good-looking shot, shoot. We don't care that you shoot 30% from the field. So that's the general mentality, and we'll see how he looks. As Sean said, Marcus Smart's season will be defined by the final, at this point in time, 23 games left in the regular season, and then, of course, into the playoffs where maybe he can make himself some money. Then it all gets really interesting. Well, episode 251 is brought to you again by eHarmony. Right now, my listeners can get a free month with eHarmony when they sign up for a 3-month subscription. Just use my promo code CelticsBeat at checkout. Thanks again to Sean Grande. Thanks as well to Nick, to Larry, to Evan, everyone else at CLNS Media. We welcome your feedback. Get me on Twitter at Adam M. Kaufman. And please, I said it earlier, if you like the shows and you want more of them, because we're thinking of expanding, leave ratings and reviews on iTunes. We appreciate it. They make a big difference, no matter how silly that may sound. Talk to you guys again in a few days after the C's have played a few games. I'm Adam Kaufman. All right, Gino, play us out.